Claire Wasserman. I'm the founder of Ladies Get Paid. If you don't know us, well, now you do. We are an educational platform, a global community, all about helping women advance professionally, financially. I am so sick of the wage gap and the leadership gap and the funding gap and the investment gap, and all of the gaps continue. And until our legal system and our government does the right thing to help us reach gender equity in all aspects, we've got to do it. And that's why we're here. We want to make sure that women are self-advocating so that we get recognized and rewarded, so that we get power in whatever ways that we define it. And I'm just so grateful to everybody who's here. Thank you, thank you. And please, again, use the chat. A lot of you all submitted questions beforehand, which was fantastic. I've shared them with Melody, and even though I have my own questions, we're going to largely use what you all want as the framework for our conversation, because guess why we're doing this? We're doing it for you, for all of you. And we're doing it for you, Melody, because you have a new book.
There it is.
Trust yourself, stop overthinking, and channel your emotions for success at work. Yeah, why do you think this is one of our most popular firesides? Does that surprise you at all?
It does. It actually does. But, someone was saying in the chat before you hopped on, it's so, I'm just trying to scroll back to it. They said, I'm so glad there are so many other sensitive people. And I think that's exactly why. And so many of the questions tonight we're going to talk about is that mindset shift from sensitivity being a bad thing to something that we can embrace. And so I think everyone is here because maybe much like me, my entire life, I really hid and tried to stifle growing up that I was someone who was sensitive. And so I hope that all of you saw the title of today's Fireside Chat and were like, oh my gosh, this is me. I need to be there. So I think that's why we're here, is that this is something so many people are, 1 in 5 people is sensitive, but we don't really talk about it. And we certainly don't think of it as a good thing. So
right.
Hopefully here to change a bit of that tonight.
Absolutely. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Melody Wilding, she has actually coached hundreds of private clients, from CEOs to Fortune 500 executives to leaders from the US Department of Education to the Federal Reserve and the United Nations. Let me just read a little bit more about you and we will jump right into it. She teaches graduate level human behavior and psychology at the Silberman School of Social Work at Hunter College in New York. Yay, New York. And her advice has been featured in the New York Times, The Cut, Oprah Magazine. It continues and continues. But the really, really exciting thing for, yes, Melody, but for all of us, because we now get to read it, is her new book. Did it come out today?
It comes out tomorrow. So the countdown is on. We are hours away.
Amazing, guys. And by the way, as somebody who also came out with her own book, pre-orders are really important to get on these bestseller lists. So go and buy. Melody, do you have the link? You want to drop it into the chat?
I do. I will put it in the chat right now. Thank you.
Thank you. There, go ahead and do that. And so what's really interesting and exciting about this book, and again, why you all are here, is Melody's not just sort of talking off the top of her head when she gives advice. She actually has neuroscience-based strategies. And even though she did say mindset, you go way beyond mindset in this book. It's very tangible, very action-oriented. It's things that, yes, you can work on long-term, but also things that you can do today. So Jazz, to get started, something that you mentioned to me, or we put in the event invitation, you talk about sensitive strivers. So maybe let's start there. What is a sensitive striver?
Sure. A sensitive striver is someone who is both highly achieving and highly sensitive. So this is someone who, like many of you, are very driven in your careers. You want to make an impact. You have you set high goals for yourself and you achieve them. But you are also highly sensitive, which means you think and feel everything more deeply than the average person. So like I mentioned, we're talking about 1 in 5 or about 20% of people who have this biological disposition. And that is shown in the science that people who are more highly sensitive have a more highly attuned central nervous system. So our brains actually have different activation to our own emotions, those of other people around us, and the subtleties in our environment. So this combination of traits, being both high achieving and highly sensitive, huge keys to success. But without the right tools, and most of us have never been given the right tools to manage these qualities, if not managed properly, can lead to some downsides. overthinking everything, burnout, many of the things you talk about, like imposter syndrome, perfectionism, people pleasing. And so that is what being a sensitive striver is. I am one myself. I am guessing many people here are as well. And I was definitely not surprised that many of you were here so early and on time, so conscientious. That is straight up sensitive striver behavior for sure.
Yeah. And somebody submitted a question. They said, is that similar to a driven empath? And maybe you can explain a little bit what an empath is.
Yes. So an empath is someone who can sense the emotions of other people. Now, I won't get into, there could be a whole argument as to whether we're talking about like a spiritual empath, but there are people who have, and this is shown in highly sensitive people, that we have more active mirror neurons. So the part of our brain that senses, that understands other people's behavior is more active than the other 80% of the population. So we do have higher empathy because we are literally attuning to, processing more deeply, synthesizing other people's behavior and emotions at a deeper level. So we are empaths and we are driven. So in some ways, it is a driven empath, but being sensitive expands beyond that. It's really responsiveness to your environment overall. So if you are someone who startles more than other people, like if a coworker walks up behind you and you're like, oh my gosh, that's certainly me. Or if you hate being observed. For example, one of my first jobs, I quit because it was in this very claustrophobic space, and I could not stand that everybody was just watching me work all day. I couldn't take it. It was too much for me. So if you are someone that also has that sort of responsiveness to everything that's going on around you, that's also high sensitivity. So it goes a little bit further than just being a driven empath, but that's also a good descriptor of it.
Um, why is being sensitive looked at maybe as being weak?
Mhm.
Particularly in the workplace. Why do we oftentimes, especially as women, feel like we have to hide it?
Oof.
Yeah.
So many reasons. And we can go deep on this. I mean, just in terms of how we're socialized, right? We're socialized in our society to not show emotions, especially in the business world and especially in American culture. Don't show emotions, keep your emotions out of it, don't let them see you sweat. That whole mentality really dominates. And what so many of us are brought up with in school, in college, when we get into the workplace. And then of course as women, it's even more intersectional. We have that socialization on us of don't be too emotional or people are going to think you're hysterical, right? And so there becomes this very negative connotation with being sensitive. I'm sure so many of you here have been told, why are you so sensitive? Stop taking everything so personally. You should grow a thicker skin, right? And those slights become stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. They become internalized narratives about how we're not enough and how we need to change who we are in order to be accepted. And unfortunately, in my case, certainly my story was that I tried to morph myself and stifle those qualities so much that I literally led myself to a burnout that almost killed me. Um, but I think that's why we do that is for the messages that we get around us. And of course, there's a lot of really messed up workplaces where if you are sensitive, you're taken advantage of, or you're beat up on, or you're gaslit. And so I would say for the most part, I think we're starting to see this change, but many workplaces aren't safe for sensitive people and certainly aren't designed for them since we are the 20%. They're designed for the other 80%.
Mhm. Um, are you open to telling us what burnout looked like for you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that
Yes,
was,
of
you
course.
just dropped something really intense. I'm like, all right, Melly, we got to circle back on that.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, 100%. And I tell this story in in the introduction of the book of my real crisis moment was when I skipped one of my best friend's wedding weekends in order to work. And there's a lot leading up to this. So, this book is really the combination of my professional experiences as a former therapist, my social work, neuroscience, psychology background combined with being the sensitive striver, being told my whole life, You take things too personally. You're so affected by everything that goes on around you. And the high achieving side of being that A plus gold star good girl, live to exceed expectations in everything I do, go to the right school, get good grades in college. And then when I came out of school, um, followed what I thought I was supposed to do to be successful, right? Took a safe career and showed up. All of my habits were things that, again, I thought I needed to do to be successful. People pleasing, saying yes to everything, just being a complete and utter perfectionist and overfunctioner, to the point where the wedding was really that the pinnacle crisis moment where I saw just how much that addiction to wanting to be productive, to prove myself, to overcompensate for my insecurities by doing more, and trying to prove my worth through how much I did, but also how I had just let my sensitivity go completely unmanaged, right? I was just so overstimulated, so depleted and run ragged that um, part of what I don't tell in the book is that I spent weekends in bed just too tired. I could not even pick my body up. I was just so empty. My hair was falling out. I was having heart palpitations. And I can remember one conversation I had with a family member where they said to me, if you keep going on this way, you're going to die. You're going to kill yourself. And they were right. And that was really the wake up moment for me that something had to change. And luckily for me, I was in a very privileged position in many ways, but I had the tools already from my background to turn things around for myself. And it just so happened that also at that time, this was right after the recession when I started my career. So I was coaching on the side to pay off college loans. And
Mhm.
so building my coaching practice on the side, seeing other people, very high achieving, high performing professionals who were struggling with the same constellation of challenges. Um, and that's where really I started to define and see the sensitive striver personality emerge from there. So it was really the combination of those two, the personal and the professional really coming together.
What was the first thing that you did that you can remember when it was like, all right, I got to make a change?
Yeah, for me, it was seeing how I was complicit in the conditions that were creating my downfall, right? How I was letting people walk all over me and making choices like that, like responding to emails at all hours. At the time, I had a boss. It was not a healthy work environment to begin with, but I wasn't making it any better by always being responsive, by over functioning and feeling like I had to fix and rescue every situation. It was my responsibility. Instead of pushing back, instead of letting other people on the team face consequences when things fell through and not being the one to fix it because I felt like I had to be the one to keep everything copacetic and okay. And so it was really me starting to see like, oh my God, I'm creating this. And stepping back, starting to pull back from that and write some of those dynamics, that was very helpful. Eventually, I did leave that workplace once I felt more empowered and I felt like I had a little more energy to do so. But when I first thought about that change, my I couldn't even make a decision to leave with a clear head. I knew I needed to change some other things first.
Mm-hmm. I think a little bit of what we're talking about here is the need to set boundaries. And, I got a bunch of
Yes.
amazing questions. So let me just read. Somebody wrote this. They said, I care a lot, but I also want to try to make sure my boundaries are clear with the people I work with. I want people to respect my time as much as I respect their time, regardless.
Mhm.
My boundaries get crossed, and I feel my time is often disrespected. I guess I'd like to know, how can I remove these quote work worries while I'm living my life at home? Okay, I should put home in
Mhm.
question marks. So I'm going to just break this down a little bit because I actually think there's sort of two questions here.
Yeah.
One question is, how do you get other people to see that your time is precious?
Mhm.
AKA, how do you say no? And then there's the time when you are by yourself and you can't create boundaries for your own emotions and your own thought process because you're still in that sort of work mode.
Yep. Yeah, and I also picked up on the fact that there were two questions here. So the first one, getting other people to respect your boundaries, comes down to you respecting them first. And I hate to say that, but it's true that you teach people how to treat you. And if you are the one who says, yeah, today I'm going to be off at 6, but then you're back on at 8:30 answering questions, people aren't going to respect your boundaries or take them seriously. So part of them is you delivering them with confidence and not undermining your boundary with, today I'm going to be off at 6, but it won't always be like this. This is just a temporary thing. And verbal vomiting a negation of your boundary and why it's important, right? So saying it directly, clearly, succinctly, but then also respecting it and holding firm that if you say you're going to be off at 6, take your email off your phone, close the computer, make sure you are not going back and answering questions, unless you have to really make an emergency exception. So I think that's key to creating strong boundaries, is you respecting them first and being incredibly clear about what your boundaries are. Many times we'll say, well, I'm going to stop working so late, or I'm going to be pulling back from this project, but we don't define exactly what that means. I'll no longer be able to help with this report. So can you see that Andrea can pick up this piece of it, right? You have to be explicitly clear about what's happening. And oftentimes we're not. We expect people to read between the lines, especially sensitive strivers, because we're so good at inferring. We often think other people are as well.
Right. And I'm going to just interject for a second, because
Yeah.
I think you're also looking at the chat, and
Oh no. Did we lose Claire, or is that me? Okay, I'm glad it's not me. All right, let me check the chat. Give me one sec. Okay, hopefully she'll come back on, but it's just me and you guys for now, you ladies. So S. Dawson was saying, it's so tied to people pleasing, isn't it? Where does that stem from? I know for me, I'm just so afraid of conflict, and that I would rather avoid it and get steamrolled. Why? So yes, people pleasing. In the book, in chapter 2, I talk about something I call the honor roll hangover, which is, okay, looks like Claire is coming back on. So the honor roll hangover, put really simply, is people pleasing, perfectionism, and overfunctioning. And it's really that desire to be the A+ student from school, honor roll, that carries over into our career, hangover. And so it's part of our conditioning, but it's also part of who we are as sensitive strivers. And so is Claire back?
yeah, can you hear me?
Okay.
The internet just is kicking me off. I don't know. So, you may end up bleeding this as a webinar. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Everybody. I don't know when I got cut off, but I was curious about if you're trying to set a boundary with your boss, right? A person who, yeah, we may be innate people pleasers for how we're socialized, but there's also inherent people pleasing, in I don't want to say serving your boss, but there is a power dynamic there that I do want to respect as well.
Of course.
So is this something you may have addressed already when my internet hated me?
Not yet. I was going a little bit of a different direction, but let's go where you're going. That's okay.
Do you want to continue on your route and then?
No, go ahead. I'll come back to it.
All right. Yeah. So how do you set a boundary with maybe a boss or even a client?
Yeah. Setting boundaries with your boss it's proactive communication first, right? It comes down to really being explicit around your priorities, around expectations for what you're going to accomplish by when with your boss. But that's but let's say that ship has already sailed, right? And we're at the point where we have to set that boundary with your boss. Things that always work is validation. Well, is thank you, and then some sort of validation. Thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. I hear that that's important, and I understand that this is a top priority. And then this is where a bit of a judgment call comes in. If it's something you think you need to do because it's important to your boss, but let's say you can't get it to them in the time frame that they're asking, or they're asking for too much, you have too much on your plate already, that's where you may find something called a workable compromise. So I'm not able to deliver X, but what I can deliver to you is Y. Right? So you're finding some sort of happy middle of what you can do, or coming to your boss with some other sort of solution that actually works on your terms. So I won't be able to deliver this in this format, but what I would propose is that we go this different direction with it. So you always want to be, especially with your boss, framing things as a solution, a problem that you've solved. You always want to be acknowledging the business priority and that you hear this is important to them. If you really need to set a boundary, then you can say, what would you like me to deprioritize? There has to be some sort of trade-off, right? You don't want to set the tone with your boss and just be a yes person and say, sure, yep, I can do that. I can do that. And then, oh my gosh, I don't have time to do all of this. So you constantly need to be saying, yes, I'm happy to do that. What would you like me to deprioritize as a result? Right.
Right. By the way, I'm enjoying in this chat. Somebody came up with, or maybe you did, the honor roll hangover. And Andrea said, seriously, honor roll hangover going strong at 41 years old over here and ready for it to stop. Capital letters, stop. I mean, I would say, I mean, how many of you feel the same way? You know, intention is a huge part of going in the right direction. Setting that intention first. And I know you were, speaking of direction, I know you were going in a certain direction when my internet decided to hated me. So sorry, go ahead. I'd love to hear.
No, that's okay. And I just for your context, so the honor roll hangover is a concept I mentioned in chapter 2 of the book, that this drive as sensitive strivers, that desire to be the A+ student in everything we do, we carry that over into our careers, right? But then it stops at a certain point. What got you here won't get you there, right? That's striving for perfection, striving to be the A+. I have clients who come to me today who say, I'm just not getting an A+ at work right now. And that it drives them insane, right? And really just steals from them so much joy and energy. So the honor roll hangover is that combination of people pleasing, perfectionism, and overfunctioning. But someone was asking, where does this come from? And so in the book, if any of you resonate with being a sensitive striver, and I think many of you do,
everybody,
there's
every person who's joined, over 600 people it resonates with.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And so in the book, the framework that underlies the book is really understanding your key qualities as a sensitive striver. There are 6. They spell out the acronym STRIVE, very easy to remember. But these qualities, I mention it, I'll go through them in a second, are important to know, because when they are in balance, that is when being a sensitive striver can be a tremendous strength. But if these qualities are out of balance, then this is where you face some of the downsides. And so the book actually lays out what it looks like on both sides, and the entire rest of the book is really a roadmap for balancing your strive qualities. But S is sensory sensitivity. That is that reactiveness, responsiveness to your surroundings. So we can be, my clients are always told in their performance reviews, you are so calm and composed under pressure. And they're like, really? Because it doesn't feel like that on the inside. But we're able to project that sort of calm presence to other people. And, oh, are you there? We lost you for a sec.
Am I still here?
So yes, you're still here. Okay. So that is sensory sensitivity, is really being responsive to your environment, can be very calm and composed. But if you're overstimulated, that can send you into stress, emotional overwhelm, or even a lot of times people freeze under pressure because they become so overstimulated that they just freeze. So that's our S. Then we have T, thoughtfulness. That is the fact that sensitive strivers are reflective, contemplative, intuitive thinkers, but when unbalanced, leads to overthinking, indecision, worry, etc. R, responsibility. We are dependable, we follow through, we are the person who can always be counted on, but we can't bear to let people down, even if it means sacrificing our own well-being. Inner drive. This is really the ambition piece. We are driven, we set high ambitions, we set a lot of goals. Sometimes we set too many goals, and sometimes we set that bar so unrealistically high that it's impossible to achieve. V is vigilance, that we are attuned and attentive to other people's needs and subtleties, changes in body language. Your boss winces in a Zoom meeting, right? Again, very valuable trait, especially if you're trying to navigate conflict or influence people. but on overdrive can lead to reading into every single comment or facial expression, for example. And then the last is emotionality. So we're sincere, we're empathetic, we feel things in a big way. We are able to motivate other people, get other people emotionally invested and excited, but we can have very strong, intense emotional responses that are hard to shake, especially negative ones. So I mention all of this because you asked, where does this come from? And I would say it's because your strive qualities are unbalanced, right? And why I offer this framework in the book is because so many people come to me feeling so overwhelmed. I hear people say my sensitivity just feels like a burden. And they have a laundry list of challenges, and we have to prioritize where we want to start. And so there's a comprehensive assessment in the book and a tool to help you really map out for yourself where you fall on the strive qualities and where to start first. But I offer that because you may also be able to say, thoughtfulness is my big problem, or responsibility is my big problem. So hopefully that helps people kind of zero down.
That when you talked about when like your boss winces, or,
Mhm.
negatively interpreting every small nuance, right? Especially if it's a person you really care about. That resonated with me personally. I have a little story about it that I can share in a minute. But
Yeah.
what do you do in a situation like that?
Yeah, I actually just wrote an article for HBR, and I'll put it in the chat, about paranoia at work, because this was such a big issue that my clients have been facing now. Hold on, let me just find it for you.
Is it exasperated now that we're online because it is just so hard to pick up on those nuances?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, because not only that, we're with ourselves all day. We lack the natural cues we used to have in the office of a nod of approval, or just even body language to tell us we're in good standing with people. We lack that now. And we're with ourselves all day. We're in this echo chamber of our own thoughts. And so one negative thought, human negativity bias takes over. And that's what tends to grow. So what can you do? A big one, someone was mentioning, Zoom is made for vigilance, for unbalancing vigilance. And that's extremely true. Like right now on Zoom, I have it on speaker view. So I just see Claire,
Mhm.
because to see everyone else as much as I want to see your beautiful faces, and I did have it at the beginning, it's a little overwhelming to watch everyone moving or turning their camera on and camera off. And so in this environment, when we're on Zoom all the time, you need to have speaker view on, turn your self view off unless you absolutely need to have it on. Um, there's a lot of good data showing that this Zoom world is really psychologically draining, because we're staring at ourselves all day, and humans aren't meant to do that. We're not meant to self-monitor in this way all the time, and it makes us incredibly self-conscious. It's valuable if you're recording a Zoom meeting and looking at how you show up on camera a couple of times, but to do it all day, every day, is just, it's utterly exhausting. So even just those few little changes to how you're spending time on Zoom can make a huge difference. Another thing I would say, and I mentioned this in the HBR article, did I put it in the chat? I
Yeah,
think I
there's
did.
just so many
Okay.
people chatting. It goes by quickly. Which, by the way,
Yeah, I'll
everybody,
put it in again.
I can save the chat.
Yes.
Well, actually, you all can save the chat on your own. If you scroll down, there are three little dots. And when I say scroll down, look at the bottom of your chat. I can also save it for everybody and share it afterwards. So keep talking in the chat. But yeah, go ahead, Melody.
Yeah. Well, one thing I mention in the article is really using your empathetic superpowers for good.
Mhm.
So many times we're in our own heads that we can turn our attention on what else may be happening for the other person. So, specifically, I have something I call the rule of five. You count off on your hand 5 other ways of viewing the situation, where there are 5 other possible explanations for what could be happening right now. Maybe your boss had a bad day. Maybe their boss gave them bad feedback. I can't tell you how many times a client has come back to me and said, yeah, my boss was in a really horrible mood because they got out of a bad meeting. Something exploded from their end on a more senior leadership level, and they were just projecting that onto me when that person made it think it was about them. It was something they did wrong. right? So really looking at what are alternate ways of viewing the situation rather than the one default negative track that you're telling yourself.
How do you pull yourself out of the spiral that often happens when something doesn't go the way that you planned? It could be that you got critical feedback or you're giving yourself critical feedback. Even though a lot of things went right, it's like you can only remember the thing that didn't go right, which maybe speaks to this human negativity bias. Or yeah, talk a little bit more about how you pull yourself out from going down the negative rabbit hole.
Yeah, this may be an unpopular opinion, but you have to let yourself feel it. And I don't mean allowing yourself to wallow out in the spiral, but in chapter 4, on the chapter on emotions, I talk about this, that what you resist persists. And the more you try to push down your emotional responses, the more you try to tell yourself, just get back to work, get over it. You're making too much out of this. The more you start invalidating yourself, it's like a beach ball underwater. You keep trying to push the ball down, but eventually when you pick your arms up, it's going to come up and splash you in the face. Emotions are exactly like that. That if you don't face them, they're going to come out in some other way. So there is also good studies that show that an emotion passes in about 90 seconds to 30 minutes. So if you can set a timer, and I think one benefit of the remote world is that we actually have more control over our time to turn off the camera, to say, I can't make this meeting right now, to set a timer and just allow yourself to feel bad for that period of time. Compartmentalize it, but do not squelch it down, and do not just allow it to last all day. We have to develop internal boundaries, self-discipline with ourself around emotion regulation. And that's what's crucial about being, someone mentioned in their questions, how do I be sensitive without being too emotional? And it comes down to emotion regulation, which is a crucial part of emotional intelligence. It's not that you just have a lot of emotions, that you sense them, but it's how you express them and manage them and experience them for yourself. So giving yourself some time box it, and then you have to find some way to process the emotions. And I will often have clients, especially if it's some sort of feedback, take a piece of paper and literally split it into 4 columns. In the first column, you write down exactly what was said or exactly what happened. My boss said I made a typo in an email. Not what are you making it mean, which is I'm horrible at my job, I don't belong here, right? We tell ourselves stories. So first column is exactly what was said. Second column is everything that is wrong with that feedback, everything that is unfair, blind spots, that makes you feel awful about yourself, everything goes in that column. The third column is what might be right or what might be useful. Is there something there? Oftentimes, I find for my clients that feedback hurts the most when it's something you're already self-conscious about. When, particularly for me, I know I am not a good editor of my own work. And so it always hits me hard when someone emails me and says, "Hey, you have this typo in this article." I'm like, "Oh, I did it again." And that always hits me hard because it's an area I know I'm weak in. So that third column is really about how do you look for the nugget of truth here or the nugget of what might be valuable. And then the fourth, the last column is what is your next action? So what can you commit to here rather than just thinking about it forever? I'm going to let it go. I'm going to talk to my friend about this or talk to my mentor about next steps. I'm going to take some sort of action, create some protocol for myself so this doesn't happen again. But that's a really good process to give you space to not only process your emotions, but do it in a very constructive, balanced, objective way.
I think you've already described it, but maybe just for everybody, if they picked up on this like emotional regulation, how do you like what is that?
So emotion regulation is becoming more skilled at how you experience and express your emotions. So in the book, again, have an entire chapter on this, but for sensitive people in particular, it comes down to managing your physiology. because going back to the sensory sensitivity aspect of the strive quality, we have a more overactive nervous system. So, and emotions are just energy in your body, right? It's your body having in many cases, a fight or flight response to a situation, right? So, unless you deal with the physiological response you have from your emotions, you're never going to be able to deal with the cognitive one. And that's often what people try to do first is they try to say, calm down, right? You're making a big thing out of nothing. We tried the self-talk route first, and that usually doesn't work because your body is like, yeah, but I'm in danger. Can we need to run from this or we need to do something about this? So you need to calm your physiology first. And the best way to do that is through grounding techniques, which are mindfulness techniques. These are things like box breathing, so deep, controlled belly breathing, for example. There is another activity in the book. It's called the 5-4-3-2-1 technique, looking at 5 things around you that you see. It takes you through the 5 senses. So it's a good way of tuning into the present and calming your nervous system. And there's all sorts of other ones in the book. But these grounding exercises are shown in studies to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So your rest and digest system, the one that's responsible for recovery, for slowing down your breathing, helps turn back on your prefrontal cortex. So the part of your brain that's responsible for self-control, decision-making, all the things you want when you're having an emotional response. And they're really simple to do. You know, most of them that I mentioned in the book only take no more than 3 minutes to do. So that's what I would say first. That's how you get yourself out of that spiral.
Let's say somebody catches you in the spiral, right? So you're crying at work and you saw that was a question that got submitted quite a few times. What do you do? What do you do?
Oh, crying at work. And actually, let me just get to that question because I had a resource there that I wanted to share. There it is. Okay. So I have an article here that I'm going to share with you all about crying at work because, yes, can't tell you how many times I get this question. And first, let me ground this in saying that crying at work is not as career ending as we think it is. I was very surprised to hear this, but when I dug into surveys that have been done about this, 75% of senior leaders say that crying every so often, not regularly, at work is does not hurt your career standing. So that is permission for anybody who has cried at work ever, and we have all been there. But paying attention to your physiology matters a lot. Like I was saying, that sort of controlled breathing matters a great deal. Another trick that you may not think works, but it does, cold water. When you start having a fight or flight response, and then many people express our reaction through tears, right? That's our response. But when your body heats up and has an emotional reaction, it heats up. So your body temperature rises. So if you can keep ice cold water, a glass of ice near you, that is going to help. If you suck on an ice cube, for example, it works. Separating yourself from the situation. If you need to get up for a minute and say, you know, can we pick up this conversation in 5? I would love to just take a minute to think about what you've shared. Redirecting your focus is something I mentioned in this article. So in your mind's eye, taking yourself to somewhere where you feel safe. Mm-hmm. If it's your childhood home, your favorite vacation spot, for example, but establishing that sense of inner safety goes a very long way. Let's see. And then the last, you know, sometimes you can't fight back the reaction. And, you know, I also don't want to play into the narrative that we should always fight back the reaction, because in some ways we do need to start making emotional reactions more acceptable in the workplace. Work is just humans doing things, right? And humans come with emotions. And so, of course, like I said, this comes down to emotional regulation, and you want to make sure you're having responses that first and foremost you feel good about, But sometimes when you can't hold it back, providing context for your reaction. So saying, as you might see, I'm really passionate about this topic, which is why I'm moved by what we're talking about. Or, I'm getting a little bit emotional about this because I'm very invested, or I value your perspective and that means a lot to me. I hear what you're saying. Go on, right? Or I'm a deep processor, so thank you for giving me space to take in what's being said. But even just providing context for it in doing it from a position of strength and not apologetically, not saying, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. This is so embarrassing, right? Because then the other person picks up on how you're feeling. So making sure you're coming from a place of strength, very important.
Yeah, I always say use it to your advantage in terms of like, but I really care, really care about you and the work that I'm doing. It's like, man, you can't, that's not negative. It's like, oh, give her a raise that she also, Mary had a good point. She said, I've excused myself from meetings when I feel the emotions are coming. It has worked well. Yeah, that's great too.
100%.
You mentioned something about like, it's good to integrate emotions into the workplace. So somebody asked, how do you incorporate sensitivity into a team's culture, especially when you do have an influential role? But we can also talk about even if you don't have an influential role, maybe you're more junior. But yeah, how do we get other people to embrace their sensitive striver?
Yes, I love this. And kudos to whoever asked this. So, first is thinking about the role or the model you set as the leader of the team. People are going to look up to you. You are the pace setter for the team. You're the one, your behavior establishes the norm and the culture largely that people are going to follow. So making sure that you are doing your part to treat people with sensitivity, to create a culture that is understanding and inclusive, to be aware of your own behaviors. Because, for example, if you are stressed out, the sensitive strivers on your team are going to be stressed out. If you overwork, they are going to overwork. So thinking about your behaviors first and the model you want to set for other people. Also being more authentic and vulnerable. I can't tell you how many times I often put that question out to my community. What could leaders do to make their teams more welcoming for sensitive strivers and have a positive influence? And time again, people say being more authentic and vulnerable. Tell me about what's going to be on. Tell me about what's going on. Talk to me about when you don't know the answers, right? Make it okay for you not to know the answers and to make mistakes. These are people who are not going to use it against you. So that would be first. Second is giving good feedback. And I know what I'm saying sounds like good management advice across the board, and it is. But for sensitive strivers in particular, we value context, we value details, right? And so again, this comes directly from people in my community and my clients who will say they are so frustrated because we are achievers, right? We always want to do more and be better. So they get so frustrated when they get vague feedback like, you need to be more strategic. Okay, what does that mean? Does it mean focus more on the big picture when you share ideas in meetings? Or does it mean, I had one client where once we dug into that feedback, he just kept hearing from the founder of this company again and again, you need to be more strategic. You need to be more strategic. And finally, when we dug into that, it was that the founder thought my client wasn't setting aggressive enough goals. He thought he was being way too conservative with the goals. And he was like, oh, okay, that's feedback I can do something with. So being very specific about the feedback is important too. And then last two things I'll say, making space for deep thinkers. About 70% of sensitive strivers are introverts as well, which means that we need space for processing. So to really get the best out of us, the best of our thoughtfulness and what our qualities have to offer, we need time. We need time to think. We need open space to concentrate. So this means things like sending meeting agendas in advance so people have time to prepare, having no meeting days. I have a lot of clients who are having success with that, just kind of blackout days. having do not disturb times when it's okay, or just creating a culture where it's okay to go on do not disturb on your team chat. All of those ways of just creating more processing time. Also normalizing in meetings, if you're asking for thoughts from people, making it okay that if someone is put on the spot and they don't have an answer right away, that's okay. Saying, you know what, why don't you take some time to think about it, and then you can circle your response over email, for example. Because sensitive strivers, we need to pause before we act, right? So you're going to get the best out of people if you normalize and leave space for that. And then the last thing I would say is amplifying their voices and giving them opportunities. Sensitive strivers, because many of us struggle with imposter syndrome and lack of confidence, we hold back our ideas. So it's a catch-22, because we're often the people, because of the way we're wired, we synthesize, we come up with original solutions, we spot problems before they happen, we can anticipate something before it's going to happen, but we don't speak up about it because, well, nobody else has mentioned it, so it must not be valid, is the thinking many sensitive strivers have. So really, as a leader, being the one to call on quieter voices. If if everyone in a meeting has talked, saying, Claire, we haven't heard from you. What would you like to share on this topic? I know you have a lot to contribute here. Giving them opportunities to step up, delegating meetings, creating skip level opportunities, all of that to help them, to show you have confidence in them and to give them opportunities to shine.
I'm always on the fence though about calling somebody else out specifically, right? Of like, I know you have something to say, because like I hear you, and like part of me is like, yes, I see the intention behind it, but that also, I mean, talk about like sensory overload. Right now, everybody's looking at you.
Fair. You'd have to let people know that there's a possibility that would happen at the
Okay.
beginning. So someone actually asked, I forget, the question was something about how do you deal with people who talk a lot? And I can understand as a sensitive driver why that's overwhelming if people just talk at you. So my response to that was going to be that you have to set expectations up front about what's coming next. And when people know the possibility of what's coming next, they're less taken aback by it. So at the beginning of a meeting, if you're able to say, hey, and part of what we're going to do here is that if there's been someone who hasn't had the chance to share, I may call on you. And that's something I do whenever I'm facilitating meetings, for example. I will say in part of the group agreements that we want to make sure all voices are heard. So I will be doing my part to manage the conversation, to make sure that, yes, the people who want to talk, but there's also space for people who may not feel as comfortable jumping in. So if you set that expectation up front, it can be a little bit better, but I hear what you're saying.
Right.
You do have to know your audience.
But also you had this great piece of advice, which was if you can try to send the agenda beforehand to folks, so they'll have more time to prepare. So that's great. Question from Sybil or Sibel. She said, any suggestions for sensitive strivers in the job search? And Lynn Laura said, wondering this too, interviews on the spot nature is so challenging for me. Any suggestions there?
Mm-hmm. I have a lot of clients who are in your shoes, and interviews are a challenge. The more you can do to prepare in terms of mock interviews, and that's often what I see. And this is a real nuance that I'm working with a client now who is in the middle of recruiting and job searching, and typical sensitive striver fashion, she has picked up every textbook. She is taking courses on her industry, like learning everything, but she is consuming knowledge. She's not necessarily practicing with it and learning to trust herself with that. Oops, my camera didn't turn off. Thank you.
There we go. Okay.
Person who
I
mentioned
didn't want to disrupt you. Oh, good. Now we've both had technical. Yay. And this is after I was like, I love online events. Let's keep doing these. Okay.
Oh gosh, thank you.
We could hear you, and that was the most important thing.
Good. I hit the wire. That's what happened. As I talk with my hands, it's my jerseyness. So what was I saying? Oh, so working with the information, starting to practice it, doing mock interviews, having networking conversations where you're starting to practice these standard, to the extent you can, standardizing the interview questions. You can, for the most part, have a good, what's the word I'm looking for? Have a good body of questions that you're going to be asked, right? And start practicing those with people so they become more comfortable coming off your tongue. So you can start to think more on your feet in meetings. And what I would say too is that practice. The more interviews you can get, the better. Even if it's a role you're kind of, you're like, oh, I'm interested in, take the interview, go through the practice. The reps are going to be helpful.
Hmm. I got a few questions here about, is there anything in the book about how or whether sensitive strivers are more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety and or
Mhm.
ADD? So I have another question off of that too. How do you know if this is something else, right? Whether it
Yep.
is, anxiety, ADD, or it's the environment actually that is
Yep.
really exasperating this.
Yep. So yes and yes. So
Okay.
in the book, I do briefly address this, and you're right. There is a fine line between um, sensitivity can leave you more susceptible to certain mental health conditions. So there is truth to that. ADHD in particular is a tricky one because many of the symptoms of overstimulation with high sensitivity and with ADHD look the same. Now, I'm not an expert on that, so I cannot speak to it too in depth, but I would find someone who specializes in ADHD, who is skilled in that. I will say the difference I offer in the book is that a mental health condition is chronic and pervasive. So that persistent, chronic, and pervasive. So it has been going on for a long period of time without any reprieve. It's chronic to the point where it's starting to interfere with your daily functioning, for example, like with anxiety. If your anxiety really starts interfering with your daily functioning at work or in your social life, for example, that's when you're dealing with a diagnosable mental health condition. And also that it's pervasive. So it's not just one domain of your life, but it's across many domains. So that's what I would say there.
Hmm. Question, how do we, and this is going back to more of the job conversation, how do we as sensitive strivers find those niche jobs that we thrive in? So maybe just beyond niche, just in general, what are good roles for us to look
Yeah.
for if we are a sensitive striver?
Yeah, and I want to go back to your question about the environment as
Oh yeah.
well. But in the book, I have an entire chapter called "Find the Right Fit," which is about finding a work environment that suits your personality, because personality job fit is extremely important. It's something we don't talk a lot about, but again, when I dug into the research, it was something I intuitively felt that, oh, your career should be a good match for your personality, but lots of data behind how beneficial it is in terms of your productivity, but also things like your income, that you make more money because you're more motivated, you're happier. So you actually end up doing better in those environments. And so in the book, I offer a framework that's called the Sensitive Striver's Hierarchy of Needs, based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it really takes you through the different dimensions you should be considering about your work environment, from the physical environment. Where are you doing your work? What is the atmosphere like? Are you in an open office? When we go back to open offices, are you working from home? How much control do you have over it? What's the sound, lighting, all of that, all the way up to what are your uh, what are your learning and development goals? What are the most important skills, competencies, aspects of yourself that you want to be advancing in your role? So there is an entire framework for that, and a quiz you can actually take in the book to assess, how am I doing on having the right fit for my personality as a sensitive striver. And then there's suggestions in the book if you feel like you are someone who wants to change it all, if you're in a role where you're, lukewarm, there's other opportunities like job crafting, for example, which is starting to shift your role, either the people you work with or the types of tasks you work on, to be a better fit for your personality. I've had so many clients really, really excel at doing that and be able to stay within a company. They loved the company, but they just weren't happy with what they were doing there. So they make a switch and then they're totally happy.
Yeah, and environment, is so key to all of this, right? Not just the job itself. So how do we make sure that we're getting into an environment where we can thrive?
Mhm.
And then if we are in an environment that's making things worse, what kind of changes can we make? And I know that that's personal too.
Yeah, yeah. So getting into the right environment, this comes down to the job search process, like we were talking about, Claire. And I know you are such a big proponent of really making sure that you are evaluating and being selective of an employer just as much as they are selecting you, right? So it really matters to do your research online, but also having internal conversations, digging deep into the culture of the company, of how do people handle conflict and feedback here. Can you talk to me about that? Or can you talk to me about a team member who's been especially successful, and what type of qualities or strengths does that person exemplify? Right? There are these questions you can ask that get at what's important here and what's the type of person that's going to be successful.
Yes. Yes. And I know we only have you for a few more minutes. Oh, we have to do this again. I have so many more questions. Um, so a question that was asked, and we already know what the answer is, but I'm still going to dig into a little bit more, which is, can I still make it to the top as a highly sensitive person? So yes, but how do you lean into your strengths? And also I know that um, uh, 2025, I think sensitivity will be the most in demand skills, right? But how do we move that forward? How do we make sure that we're part of this trend of embracing sensitivity as a superpower?
Such a great question. Yes, sensitive strivers can make it to the top. My clients are CEOs, they're founders of companies with millions of dollars in venture funding. So, yes. And as Claire was saying, if you look at future of job reports, all of the top skills are things sensitive strivers are high in: complex thinking, critical thinking, problem solving, working with people, collaboration, communication, empathy.
Right.
It reads like a laundry list of things that a sensitive striver is high in. And what can we do? I think it's starting to talk about. I will say, people often ask me, should I tell my boss, or should I share with people I'm a sensitive striver? They're always scared to do it, but when after they do, every single person comes back to me and was like, that was the best decision I made. That it was so empowering to feel like I could say this with confidence, this is who I am. And the other people said, wow, it's so helpful to understand you in this way. So, as sensitive strivers, we have to be more confident about what we bring to the table in terms of our, not just our emotional sensitivity, but the other qualities that come with it, like being observant, perceptive, emotionally intelligent, right? So many of my clients are say they're not good at office politics, but once we start working together, they realize that being a sensitive striver makes them excellent at
Yeah.
navigating office politics, because office politics are just relationships, right? And you can do it in such a genuine way and change the definition, change how those dynamics are at your workplace. So, being clear about what you offer. Um, Let me see. I had this somewhere and I want to make sure I get to my notes on this. I know we
Maria,
only
I'm
have a
going to address
second.
you. Maria asks, is this book just for women? And I think the answer is absolutely not. And I don't even think you mention women in the description of it at all. I mean, I think given how we're socialized, right? We're socialized to sort of be these people. But yeah, how much do you talk about women in this book?
So the first chapter, I go into the gender differences, which there are actually no statistical gender differences in sensitivity between men and women. Actually, newborn boys at birth are more sensitive in that they startle more than young girls. But what does differ is socialization, and that I go into in the book. Um, so, the last thing I'll leave everyone with is talking about the value that your sensitivity delivers: new opportunities, spotting gaps, problems that other people miss, collaboration, working cross functionally. Those are all hard, tangible ROI that you can point to that your sensitivity brings to the table.
And I always say in interviewing or annual reviews to call those things out specifically, right?
Yes.
Those strengths, and to give an example of the impact
Yep.
that you'd be able to have
Exactly.
with that, whether it was on your work or on your team. And oftentimes it is on your team, right? In the company culture, because that, to your point before, right? It's the relationship building that we're actually really,
Mhm.
really good at. Um, oh, good. I'm just the chat. My loves, community. You guys are absolutely the best. I've also gotten requests like, please, let's do this again. So let me talk to you later. If there's
We
something we
will.
can do, because I was going to say this is so much more than one fireside, but you know what, guys, it really is. This is a 243-page book. So everything we talked about is in here and more. Tell us, where can we find you, follow you, purchase the book, all that good stuff. I will go ahead and drop a link again into the chat, guys, because really, I mean, it's coming out tomorrow, so you're getting the first look.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for being here and spending your time. You can find the book anywhere books are sold. Claire popped the link in the chat, but it is out tomorrow. And you can find me at melodywilding.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn at Melody Wilding as well. But I can't wait. Thank you all for being here. I can't wait to connect with you.
Yay. And last question is, as you wrote the book, right, you had a whole process of getting feedback with the editor. Now you're about to, it's going to come out, and it's vulnerable. And I'm speaking from a personal experience, and you will get feedback, you'll have people telling you how it is. How are you preparing, knowing that you are this book, and you have gone through everything? What are you doing for yourself now?
Oh, Claire, I'm taking your advice. And I actually mentioned something you shared with me once in the book, which is really creating mental boundaries by visualizing. And you shared this visualization of painting yourself in gold armor before going into difficult conversations, and that was kind of your protective force field. So that's what I'm doing. I'm putting on my gold armor and coming out strong.
Oh man, I didn't even, I wasn't trying to set Melody up here to give me some kudos, but by
You
the
gave
way,
me a good segue.
that visualization's in my book, ladiesgetpaid.com/book. And yeah, let's support, women, buy our books. People have also dropped in links about purchasing it from, women-owned bookstores,
Yes.
Black-owned businesses. Bookshop.org is great.
Yep.
There's Melody's LinkedIn. Follow her on Instagram. I'm at Claire Gets Paid. Much love and thanks to you, to everybody here. We will send out the recording to folks tomorrow, but if you're watching this on YouTube, we love you too. That's on the YouTube, Ladies Get Paid YouTube channel. So you all should subscribe to it so you get a notification when we put up recordings. Really appreciate you. Hope you get a great night's sleep tonight. This book journey it's a roller coaster, but in the best way possible. It really is, because you're changing people's lives, as you know. And hopefully we'll do something next with you. Keep us posted, and
I hope so.
Have a wonderful evening, you all.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Stay well.